I think what is most interesting about David is that he has Guyanese roots, and when he comes up, he will tell us where exactly in Guyana those roots are planted.
Well, thank you very much. So, look, I'm standing here as a parliamentarian in probably the most well-known parliament in the world, and that is the Parliament of the UK. And if you've ever switched on the television and seen those green benches on which British parliamentarians sit, I sit right on the back wall, quite far away from the UK Prime Minister, so that I can cuss and shout and not get into trouble. And I stand up on behalf of the people that I represent. And as we have just had a wonderful speaker that comes from Jamaica, which in so many ways is a beating pulse in this region of the world, let me just evoke a very famous Caribbean individual, a very famous Jamaican. Perhaps one of the young people might tell me, who do you think is the most famous Jamaican? Go on. Usain Bolt. He is the most famous Jamaican today. Can we hear a second individual? Go on, who I think is the most famous? Marcus Garvey is good, but that's very intellectual. Let's have someone more street. Bob Marley. And what did Bob Marley say? Get up, stand up for your rights. That is why I'm here, because this is about governance and how you get your rights. If you look at that emblem that is the emblem of, or the, that is what we think of when we think of Ghana, the coat of arms, what does it say? It says, one people, one nation, one destiny. It's a fantastic slogan, but how does it get meaning? How do we get that one? And how do you in this room participate in that one? That is what we're talking about when I think we're in the business of talking about green conversations. So the first thing to understand about me is that or my story, if you like, the thing that I try and hold, is that my father left Guyana. He left Hopetown in West Coast Berbice, and he came to the UK in 1956. All I know about 1956 is that the TVs were black and white in those days. It was a very different era. And he left, my mother came a little bit later, Guyana, to forge a new path in the UK. And so I'm very proud to stand here, yes, born in Britain, but as a son of this great country. And I am very fortunate that I have been able to come back to Guyana every year for the last 25 years. And more recently, in the last 3 or 4 years, I have come back to Guyana sometimes 3-4 times a year, always short trips, because I'm often coming to work with the government or to work with business, but coming back to this fantastic country. This is my 3rd time in Lethem. I first came here I think it was 1996, so that's now 22 years ago. And then I remember being here the summer just after Princess Diana lost her life, actually, and she died. So I've got this resonance of Lethem, and there are little bits in my mind that I associate with this part of the world. One of the things I associate with this part of the world is it's quite hard to leave Lethem and not be covered in red dust. So that when I'm unpacking my suitcase back in London, I will be carrying a bit of this place with me back to London. And I think on a few occasions, sometimes I saw a little spider running there, and it needed to enter my bag. Even that will end up back in London. So, I am here as a parliamentarian. I have the privilege of sitting in the UK Parliament, which is clearly the UK, one of the major developed countries of the world, speaking on behalf of my constituents, but sometimes raising issues on behalf of a group of people that I know and feel some relationship with. So if there are issues in this region, it's my job to raise it sometimes with the British Prime Minister. When there are hurricanes that wash through the top of the Caribbean and people's homes are flooded and places are broken down, it's my job in the UK to remind the UK Prime Minister of the responsibility that the UK has to that region. And frankly, if I and others were not there, they would leave the Caribbean to get on with it. When a UK Prime Minister arrives in a country like Jamaica, and despite the history that the UK has with Jamaica, the only thing he wants to talking about is how we can build a prison in Jamaica. It's my job to give him some cussing when he gets back to London and say, how dare you go to Jamaica and talk to them about building a prison. And it was my job when the British government sent people, or were sending people away from Britain who'd lived there for a long time, who'd come from the Caribbean, to stand up for those people and say that they should not do that. They deserve passports and they deserve to be treated properly, as you heard. That is the business of representation. But representation does not work effectively if I am just off on my own track, doing my own thing, if there aren't people behind me, in front of me, alongside me, able to effectively communicate what they feel. When I was growing up, I was growing up in a part of London that was full of immigrants. It was quite poor. And I have to tell you, I felt that politics was something done to me. It was not something I could influence. And a woman was running Britain called Margaret Thatcher, and she didn't seem to care very much about me. It must be the case that sometimes sitting in a country like Guyana, in a place like Lethem, politics is something far away in Georgetown. And in Georgetown, decisions are made far away in the UN and other places. It's something done to you. It's not something you can influence. Perhaps here in Guyana, things might be able to change a bit. Now, the other thing that I think is important to hold in a room like this is the dignity and the confidence, I hope, of the community that's here. So this room is a room full of first peoples of this nation and this country. People whose ancestors were here a long time before anybody else. And I have been to other parts of the world. I have been to Australia. I was there a year or so ago. I have been to New Zealand, to Canada, with other communities of First Peoples. Brazil, just next door. And all the way around the world, there is a story that is often a story of completely denying the understanding that the land and that the country belonged to these people before others arrived. And then there is an irony, because it is also the case, if I am with an Aboriginal in Australia, if I am with a Maori in New Zealand, it is also the case that on the green issue and on environmental sustainability, these peoples traditionally, over successive centuries and generations, have understood the earth and understood the ecosystem better than many, many other communities. So that is about strength and contribution. It is not to say that people come today to tell you about what is green or what is sustainable. It's to say and to remind this community particularly that you and your ancestors have always known what is sustainable. When it's Christmas morning and I am cooking up pepper pot, or I am cooking up garlic pork, much of that derives from a people in this country that know how to preserve and keep meats, who know how to find cars rib. And much of that heritage comes in part from this community. And it is also to say that here in Guyana, obviously as well as Amerindian communities, we have former enslaved communities in the shape of the Afro-Guyanese communities particularly, and former indentured communities in the shape of the Indo-Guyanese and Portuguese Guyanese to some extent. Now, that is a story of hardship and pain, but also triumph. But one of the themes that has always been a theme in this country, this beautiful fertile land with so much in the ground, is that Guyana has, for most of its history, in fact all of its history, been a place where people come, they get from the land and then go away. So, gold, extracted, out. Oil come, extracted, out. Plant things, wonderful things. On this trip, I've been looking at the coconut industry. Again, often picked, extracted, out. This new horizon, particularly in relation to the oil and the gas that will be found in Guyana, I hope will see more benefit for Guyanese and more prospect of not just things being taken out, but things being processed, produced and kept, and money and wealth being kept. But that can only happen if people feel empowered to access and exercise their rights and communicate that. And that's why the development that Guyana is on to ensure that politics is not just done far away in Georgetown or far away beyond, but is local as well. And politics is dynamic and local and regional is very, very important. Now, I've been all around the world, and I have learned the 5 things that make for a successful community. And what are those 5 things? that make for a successful, what 5 things are going on that tell you that you are in a successful community? The first thing is education. Education is happening if you are in a successful community. The second thing is employment. People are employed, they are industrious, they are working if you are in a successful community. The next thing is aspiration. That in this 21st century, you can aspire, you can dream, and you can achieve. Particularly if you were parts of communities in the previous century, at the beginning of it, who couldn't do that. I'm thinking now of women and girls particularly. Black people also struggled, brown people in that century, to really achieve what they want to achieve. Education, employment, aspiration, parenting, and community. And if those 5 things are going on, you have a successful community and you are able to have many conversations. I'm afraid if some of those things, sometimes they're not all going on at the same time, but if some of those things fall away, you're not having a conversation very easily. So, education. One of the themes that I, as a UK parliamentarian, bring to Guyana is, at this point in time, skills and education is key for Guyanese people to access this new economy. And this new economy particularly will be driven by the oil and gas sector. How are Guyanese to participate and be engaged if they are not sufficiently educated or skilled up? And I say to the young people, and I've done this experiment all over the world. Let me have a quick experiment to see that you guys are waking up. Stand up, all the young people, stand up. I'm talking young. Younger than me. Right. Now, one of the things that's happening for the millennial generation, you young people in this room, is there's a lot of noise. And the noise is getting in the way of these conversations. It's getting in the way of the education. And the noise is coming from technology. A lot of noise coming from technology. So, how many of you young people have one of them Xbox or PlayStations or game business going on here? Ah! Good! How many of you young people have a smartphone, or maybe you're holding up your parents and holding? Good! Anyone plugged into Facebook or anything like that? By the way, so you have to sit down. Anyone who's got, I should have said, anyone who's got Xbox, PlayStation, smartphone needs to sit down, as I mentioned. Any other technology that I'm missing out on? Anything I've forgotten?
Game Boy.
What?
Game Boy.
Game Boys. Anyone got Game Boys or Nintendos or them pocket things? Tablets? iPads? Good. All of you young people still have the prospect of becoming Nobel laureates. Thank you very much. So look at that. If I did that experiment in London or New York, everybody would sit down. But because of issues of access to the internet, money, finance, border town, just on the edge of Guyana, coast of Brazil, many of you are still standing up. So you may not be able to, of course, some of these things you might like, but the truth is, in terms of the core things to forward your life and enter into the discussion about the future of the country you're in, none of that is necessary. really. So that is good. The education need not be interrupted. So how do we create an environment in which you demand more from the people that serve you both nationally and locally in your own country? And why is it important to be able to demand more? It's important to be able to demand more because of that second thing I mentioned, employment. Employment. Do we want jobs in this room? Yes or no?
Yes.
Oh, see, that was loud and clear. Do we want opportunities in this room? Yes or no?
Yes.
Do we want those opportunities to be here in the local environment and a little bit further afield? Yes? And so creating the ingredients for good governance and having that conversation is about being able to demand that so you create employment which creates wealth and opportunity. Yes? Absolutely. And let me just say, I was born poor, really poor. Days when, we didn't really have much food. And to be honest, I stand here today and money is not something that I have to worry about. I remember those headaches. I remember my parents worrying about money. Stress, so stressful. Remember it. And I remember thinking, God, it would be nice not to have to worry. And I have achieved it. But I'm not just here for myself. I want to achieve it for many others in my own community and across the world. And that's why I'm in the business of politics. And only employment brings that opportunity. And then we have the aspiration. When I was at school, I got to about the age of 16 and I was brave enough to say to the teacher, I want to be a lawyer. I didn't know any lawyers, never met a lawyer, never put on a suit. But I decided, probably because I was watching television, there was a show on television at the time called LA Law, for those of you who are old enough to remember, had a black guy on it, and I thought, I want to be that black guy. And I decided I want to be a lawyer. And I said to the teacher, I want to be a lawyer. I don't know how to be a lawyer, but I like to be a lawyer. And the teacher looked at me and she said, David, I don't think that's going to be possible. I think, David, that you would be a good fireman. Now listen, I've got nothing against firemen, but if your house is on fire, you do not want me lumbering up the ladder to put out the fire. I would have made a very bad fireman. But basically it was about what this teacher believed in her heart I could achieve and do. It's this aspiration piece. Because this was an era in London where there wasn't that much aspiration for black youth to be able to do things. And I've got a feeling that there are still constraints in people's minds about what is possible for the young people in this room. And we have to unshackle that because you see, our history, all of us in this room, is predicated on one idea. And it's a very simple idea, guys. Because all of us in different ways have got ancestors that have faced hardship. And in those moments of hardship, it's important, and I'll just talk about that in relation to the community that I'm from. In those moments where those slaves were brought from the continent of Africa to the Caribbean, dragged away from their parents, losing touch with their language and where they're from, and many of them were young children because that's why they were caught. Worried as they were sitting in the bottom of the ship, chained, I'm afraid sometimes in their own filth and muck. In those moments of despair, where they prayed that they would survive and that some lost their lives, they dreamed one day of freedom, and they dreamed one day that they and their ancestors would continue. And it is because of their dreams and their beliefs that I am here. For those of you who are Amerindian, when Westerners and white Europeans arrived in the continent of the Caribbean and South America and Latin America with guns and serious weaponry, and actually when some communities that you have some relationship with were wiped out, I'm thinking of the Carib people, wiped off the planet in terms of the Caribbean, they had dreams, and you are the fruits of those dreams. And so this business of aspiration, of what I can do, how I can be in the conversation, is really important. Now, I don't need to talk to you about parenting, because none of you are going to become parents too early. And I don't think I need to talk to you about community, because the one thing that you have going on in spades is community and that sense of self and identity. And that is why we're here in this room, because community is happening all the time. And in fact, some of the world could learn from you about community. So those are the ingredients of success and what a successful community looks like. And if you have that, you're able to access the conversation and have that conversation. You're able to have the conversation about how you get the skills and the education, how you influence the politicians, how politics is not just something done in Georgetown, it's something done here, how your community has historically understood the environment, understood state sustainability, how you have something to offer, and how you still can. How we balance new and old and change together. And how Guyana, in this historic moment, clearly moves forward in a big step in the next few years, but how it carries its people and its communities with it. I think for the millennials in this room, it's going to be a time of tremendous change. I think that road between Lethem and Georgetown will absolutely come in serious time in your generation. I think that the oil and the gas 10, 15 years from now will feel very, very real. I think that you'll see again, by the way, in Guyana, that more Westerners start arriving. And I think that if I ask the question in 15 years' time of young people, who has access to Xbox, Gamebox, this, that, and the rest of it, you'll all sit down. So this is going to be an era of big, big change. You need to be influencers in that change. It's a wonderful thing that on a Saturday morning you're in this room. But I hope I leave you with the idea of your own agency and why the business of governance and politics is important, not just for people in suits in Georgetown, but absolutely for you as citizens to partake in and be part of. Thank you very much.